Welcome to War Room Impeachment, 14 December, year of our Lord, 2019, episode 71, live from a very dreary, chilly, and rainy Capitol Hill today. We're live on the John Fredericks Radio Network, nationwide on Salem Radio Network Broadcasting, also on americasvoice.news, which is a streaming service not only everywhere in the United States, but everywhere in the known world, in Newsmax TV, Chris Ruddy's amazing fastest growing cable news operation now in 70 million homes. I want to thank all of our distributors, also people like Jim Hoft and the folks at Gateway Pundit, Michael Patrick Leahy, and all the papers of the Tennessee Star, the Minnesota Star, all the folks that have us on the homepage, and including our guest. We have Raheem and Jason are taking a much-needed day off as they've been doing double duty on the John Fredericks Radio Show and on War Room and the specials. Today we have Jenny Beth Martin, co-founder and leader of the Tea Party Patriots. She's got us up on her amazing site, which is the Trump Defense Movement. We're going to get into all that in the show. We're going to have a real drill down on the grassroots movement, everything that's there, the support function now as we shift into the most important part of this impeachment of Donald J. Trump. Remember, on War Room Impeachment, we started about 8 weeks ago, and we're going to be here every day, 7 days a week, live, until the day after the acquittal of Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States. A historic week, not only on Capitol Hill for only the fourth time in the country's history. The Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives has moved articles of impeachment on a sitting president, first time ever in a first term. And we're going to get to now Jim Schultz here momentarily, former senior lawyer in the White House counsel's office in the first couple of years of President Trump's administration under Don McGahn. And Jim was the guy that really led the Tiger team on the deconstruction of the administrative state, all this great economic growth coming from this massive deregulation, Jim Schultz being one of the leaders of that. So we're going to get into a lot today about the grassroots movement. We'll talk about China, some pretty brutal news coming out of Beijing this morning. New York Times reporting, Gordon Chang's tweeting out. They've had, I think, a press conference over there to talk about their version of what they think the China deal is. We're going to get into all of that today and also talk about the historic wake-up call for the Democratic Party that came from our mother country, the United Kingdom, on Thursday. An absolute brutal beatdown of this kind of toxic mix of socialism, cultural Marxism, and anti-Semitism that is the Labour Party. Got absolutely smoked by our good friends in the Tory Party, and also with the help of Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party that actually stood down and made many seats available to the Tories. So we'll get into all that later. I want to start with Jim Schultz. Jim, thank you very much for joining us on War Room Impeachment.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me on. You're doing a great job with War Room.
Well, thank you, and particularly since you're one of the guys that really made things happen on the campaign. You're a major player in Pennsylvania, which is, I've always said, as goes Pennsylvania, so goes the nation. You don't win Pennsylvania, you're not going to be president of the United States. That's really going to hold true. It held true in 2016. It's really going to hold true in 2020. I know you're one of the great laboring oars up there to help the president. Also, you're a CNN contributor. You know, Jason used to be, Steve Cortez, another friend of the show, used to be. You're one of you and Santorum and Dave Urban are kind of the last men standing there to take incomings. And you only go into the hardest shows. You only do Cuomo, and you never get the easy ones. Always the toughest days and the toughest assignments. But you're writing a piece you were able to share it with me in draft. I'm going to get to in a second. That's quite brilliant about Congressman Schiff and the way he's handled things. But I want to start first off, a historic day on the Judiciary Committee. Can you walk people through exactly what happened, and particularly these two charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress? We had thought for a long time there'd be three charges. We thought since Nancy Pelosi was all in on this, there'd be these tough charges of bribery, extortion, quid pro quo, treason, high crimes and misdemeanors, kind of things people had historically thought were associated with people like, Richard Nixon and Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. But it came out differently. Can you explain to the audience what happened and why did he have these two charges, which President Trump says is impeachment light?
Well, look, the president's not altogether wrong here, and it is impeachment light. Let's start first with obstruction of Congress. We heard during the testimony, the claim for obstruction of Congress is that the president and the president's advisors and the White House counsel's office and the executive branch generally didn't cooperate with the investigation, didn't produce witnesses, didn't produce documents. Well, there's a system of checks and balances in this country, Steve. So let's start with the first. So when a subpoena is issued by Congress and it's issued to the executive branch of the government, the executive branch has an ability to object to that, seek to quash that subpoena. They sought the testimony of a number of folks who didn't go in and testify. And because they had valid, colorable legal claims at the end of the day to make an argument before court as to why they shouldn't be in, Congress just ignored that. They just, all Congress did, all Democrats in Congress were interested in doing was demagoguing the issue rather than actually following the law, going to court over this, taking it through the appeals courts, taking it through up to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court would hear it, and get a final judgment as to whether these materials were validly asked for, whether the testimony was validly asked for, whether the administration can object to that testimony and those materials. So you don't get an obstruction of Congress claim.
Let me ask you, what you're holding on is executive privilege. Can you explain to the audience, and maybe it's not legal scholars, exactly what is the definition of executive privilege, and why does the president and why does the executive branch actually have the ability not to share? I mean, the Congress, the House of Representatives, the founders set that up as in appropriations, in investigations. The most power really in the legislative branch goes to the House because that's closest to the people. It's elected every 2 years. Why does a president, why does the executive branch have the ability to withhold anything from the people's house?
So the reason the executive privilege is there is because there are certain things that go on in the executive branch, certain deliberations that are very, very important. And when those deliberations take place, the president and his advisors need to be free to communicate with one another on the deliberative actions, the deliberative means that they need to take in order to make good decisions for this country. So that was recognized, constitutionally recognized by courts of law as something that's imperative to the executive branch in order to do its job.
But so, isn't the argument, isn't that been defined as just the closest advisors to the president? So when the president's talking to his senior counselors, when the president's talking to maybe certain cabinet heads, or in the inner sanctum of the Oval Office, or in the down in the National Security Council in the Situation Room, or in other locations where he's talking to his utmost advisors about matters of state and matters of high importance. Isn't that what it's supposed to? It's not executive privilege is not a blanket immunity. And didn't President Trump and the administration ask for essentially blanket immunity?
Well, here's the deal. Let's go back to and I'll talk about the Fast and Furious case during the Obama administration a little bit.
Oh,
during that case,
yep.
the Obama administration, President Obama apparently had conversations with then Attorney General Eric Holder, and those conversations, executive privilege was asserted over those conversations. They didn't turn over that information. They didn't. They didn't testify as to those conversations relating to between the Attorney General, the president's cabinet member at the core of it, and the president, because they believed that was a deliberative discussion that was imperative to the executive branch doing its business.
This was when he was going to be held. This is when Holder's going to be held up for not obstruction of Congress, but withholding information of contempt of Congress for not coming and testifying fully about the gun walking episode in the latter years of the Bush administration and the first years of the Obama administration. Correct?
Correct. And what they ultimately did, a deal was ultimately worked out on that. It worked its way through the court, and a deal was ultimately worked out on that. And that's the way these things.
Okay, but this started with. Right? I think this started with Kupperman, and when Kupperman went into the courts, are you saying that the reason there's obstruction of Congress is because Nancy Pelosi forced marched this so quickly? What she should have done in a proper manner is go through the courts, the other branch of government, let the courts decide here on what would be a fundamental or foundational decision on separation of powers about who can do what.
Right, and whether portions of those discussions are discoverable by Congress, what is discoverable by Congress, all that's set up to be worked out through the court systems, and for the courts to make that judgment at the end of the day. All they were concerned about was a time frame within which to impeach the president. This has nothing to do with following the law. This has everything to do with about ramming this thing through as quickly as they could. Because remember, Steve, while all this is happening, the numbers are going down on impeachment, right? So they're watching the numbers dwindle. They're seeing the fact that they're just trying to look. They did this. They start out with that, which was a train wreck. Then they went to the basement to take depositions and hold hearings in secret.
The secret auditions for the Moscow show trials later, right?
Right. So they start off, they bake the cake in the basement, right? And then they come out and they're going to hold some hearing over at Judiciary, and they say, hey, White House, do you want to participate in this in some way, shape, or form? And at that point in time, they're just asking the White House to be around for putting the icing on the cake. I mean, the White House, they needed to have an ability to go in there and cross-examine witnesses early on.
But you're saying, if I can summarize for a move on thing, and Jenny, Beth, in this show, you just got to jump in here.
Okay.
But you're saying the obstruction of Congress charge came because they wanted to quick march this through. What they should have done is gone and fought the administration in the courts for a landmark separation of powers of what really happens.
I don't think, and Jim, this is Jenny Beth Martin. I don't think that they want that decision from the Supreme Court because they don't want their hands tied later. They don't want their hands tied now, and they certainly don't want them later.
Well, this is good. How do you think the courts, given the evidence you've seen on their asking a blanket immunity, given the evidence that you've seen about what advisors, some of these are clearly not intimate, close advisors of the president, how do you think it would work through the court, and where do you think the courts would ultimately come out, Schultz?
So here's the thing. It doesn't have to be those, the definition of close advisor can be a lot of things. There are senior advisors to the White House in various agencies. Agency heads would fall under that qualifications we saw in the Holder matter. So this idea that it has to be the people who are assistants to the president in terms of their commissions, the closest advisors to the president, is just flat out false. It doesn't work that way. Cabinet secretaries fit into that same realm, and there is an argument, and the White House counsel's office made it, that the president has a right to have advisors that are outside the administration. Remember, these are the president's communications that are protected. He needs to be able to speak with a number of different people making decisions. The White House counsel's office made an argument that, hey, this even extends to folks outside the administration. So the fact that, and a lot of this hasn't been tested, so the fact that they're making colorable legal claims that Congress is refusing to take to the courts is this is the problem. They're just trying to force through an agenda that they've been trying from day one.
Did they not have that in your mind as a legal expert and a senior partner of a white shoe Philadelphia law firm? Do you believe they didn't have the goods on obstruction of justice, and that's why they went to this second thing, obstruction of Congress, which according to President Trump is impeachment light?
Yeah, they don't have obstruction of justice. They certainly don't have obstruction of Congress. Just because the executive branch has a disagreement with Congress over what they need to turn over, which has happened for years and years and years, is not tantamount to obstruction of Congress in any way, shape, or form. That's why we have the courts. If a court had ruled, the highest court in the land, or the court of jurisdiction that was making a final determination that materials needed to be turned over or certain witnesses needed to testify, and the president ignored that, then I think Congress has a valid argument to say there's obstruction of Congress, because now they've gone through the entire process. A court has ruled, and now if the executive branch were thumbing their nose at the court, that's when they would have a problem. Before we go into
the abuse of power, the president waived all executive privilege in the Mueller investigation, sent Don McGahn, Reince Priebus, Stephen K. Bannon, and others up there. And I was a big vocal thing of saying I don't think that's particularly wise, but that's Donald Trump's president of the United States, had his lawyers. They waived executive privilege for the Mueller investigation. Why did all of a sudden they fall back on executive privilege for this?
But they didn't completely waive it because they gave the best evidence and made the best evidence public, and that would be the transcript / call summary. And they did it for two phone calls, not just one.
Good point. So Schultz, why did we waive executive privilege for Mueller and didn't do it here?
Look, they turned over thousands and thousands of documents in the Mueller investigation. They turned over witnesses to go and talk to Mueller. And part of that, remember, Steve, that wasn't a congressional investigation. That was a law enforcement investigation. We can argue all day long whether that investigation,
You're saying it was an executive.
Right?
It was an executive branch investigation of the executive branch.
Right, and with a guy who had legitimate subpoena power from the courts to go to the courts, get subpoena power, and issue subpoenas. He was like a super U.S. attorney, if you will. So he had the right to issue those subpoenas. And really, if they didn't cooperate with the document requests and producing some of those witnesses, we would have had a constitutional showdown that would have gone to the Supreme Court, because the Justice Department wasn't going to sit idly by like Congress did. And just allow them to say no. And Congress just sat idly by because, quite frankly, they didn't care.
Okay.
All they wanted to do was reach an end to this as quickly as possible and get the end of the story that they wanted.
Okay, Jenny Beth Martin brought up here. I want to pivot now. Jenny Beth Martin brought up, hey, there's no bribery. There's no extortion charge. There's no bribery charge. There's no high crimes and misdemeanors. There's nothing hardwired into the Constitution. In the first charge, it's abuse of power. Is that too general? Light jump in here.
Yeah,
Ben.
it's not treason, bribery. It's not misdemeanors, and there's certainly on top of misdemeanors are no high crimes.
Why did there was no crime? Why did they go to abuse of power? Mr. Schultz.
So in that instance, when they went to abuse of power, because one, they certainly didn't have treason, and nobody. And remember, you're appealing to the American public here. They're not going to a court of law with this. They're not making charges that a judge is going to rule on. They're making charges that are going to go to the Senate, and this is entirely political. I love how the Democrats really try to spin this. They say, okay, these are legal issues here, not political issues, when it's convenient for them. Then when the legal issues aren't convenient for them, they say, well, this is political. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. They didn't have the goods as it relates to treason, bribery, any specific high crime or misdemeanor that would fall into what the American public would look at and say, yeah, that's a crime. In Richard Nixon's case, you saw the crime. And in that case, the crime was theft. There was a break-in. There was a criminal investigation, and you had something they had something to hang their hat on in Congress, which is why you ended up getting bipartisan support against Richard Nixon, because there was real evidence there. In this case, you're going through a process, quite frankly, that was questionable from the beginning, didn't look good for the Democrats from the beginning. They didn't have credibility with the American public. And again, that's not a legal issue. That's a political issue. So they don't have bribery. They don't have treason. They don't have any specific crimes. They don't have perjury. They've got nothing.
How
right?
is it?
So go ahead. Sorry.
I just, when you sit there and you lay out those items, I don't understand how it's even, what they're doing right now is actually even a constitutional impeachment.
Yeah, this is the question I wanted to get to, is that if you go back and look at the videos of Nixon's Judiciary Committee, and you look at, because Nixon resigned shortly after the Judiciary Committee voted. He didn't even wait for it to go to, they never had a vote in Congress. They negotiated his deal and he was gone. The Clinton thing also. But the deportment of people, this thing was kind of a fracas over, on those 2 days they did it. And to Jenny's best point, was that because there wasn't enough there, and that's why it just turned into a political brawl?
It was a political brawl because one, the process just didn't play out. The process needs to play out. There's in Nixon, there was a criminal investigation. In this case, they're going to try to call that whatever the Intelligence Committee did in the basement, the full investigation.
Well, let's pivot that. We got a couple minutes in this segment. Your piece is going to go up in CNN later. Is at least in draft form, to me, was quite brilliant. Let's go, because you go right to the heart of that. That the problem here is you had an illegitimate process run by Schiff that wasn't due process. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was not due process. There was no process in this, right? And we can argue over what due process rights the president had all day long. But at the end of the day, the American people can't be confident in a process that doesn't bring witnesses, that doesn't fully vet and fully see through the investigation. When witnesses seek to quash subpoenas before the court all the time. When a subpoena is issued, a lawyer can go in and say, look, this isn't a valid subpoena, or can argue over whether the subpoena is valid. In this case, that never happened. So witnesses never made it. There wasn't a real law enforcement investigation. They called in some witnesses to be deposed by folks that are, congressional lawyers. These aren't folks that are law enforcement officials with the power of the courts.
Didn't they argue? And do you buy the argument? Do you think they backed it up? One of the arguments they made is that the president of the United States is a clear and they said this is a clear and present danger of his trying to get foreign influence into campaigns. He must be stopped immediately. And Jim, all those niceties you've got of due process and subpoenas and going anything that's fine, but he is a clear and present danger to the United States about involvement of foreign powers.
Committing an ongoing crime.
Do you think they back that up, or is that hype?
No, this is them trying to continue the same narrative that started with the Mueller investigation and landed flat on its face, and then they're continuing it with this narrative saying that the president abused his power, and because they have nothing else to say besides that general sense that the president abused his power. At the end of the day, and I've said this a ton of times, the president didn't ask for someone to be convicted without any due process. The president didn't ask for them to arrest Hunter Biden. At the end of the day, one government asked another government to look into an issue that, quite frankly, that Biden's opponents on the Democratic side and others have raised eyebrows about. The fact that he's asking them to look into it and stand by the fact that they're looking into it in and of itself isn't tantamount to abuse of power. The fact that it may have some political benefit to the president at the end of the day and also have benefit to the United States, if in fact the investigation yields some facts or evidence, that's irrelevant to this discussion.
Jim,
otherwise,
we got to go to commercial break. What I'd like to do is ask you to hold over just for 5 minutes on the other side, because I want to talk to you about the trial in the Senate. It's Jim Schultz. He's former White House counsel with Don McGahn. He joins as CNN contributor. We're going to return in a moment. Jenny Beth Martin, Stephen K. Bannon, War Room Impeachment. We'll be back in Jim Schultz in just a moment.
War Room Impeachment. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to War Room Impeachment, 14 December, year of our Lord 2019, episode 71. We're live from Capitol Hill on the John Fredericks Radio Network, nationwide on the Salem Broadcast Radio Network, America's Voice.news, live streaming constantly in Newsmax TV. Chris Ruddy's great news operation down there out of Palm Beach, Florida. Want to go back to Jim Schultz. Got Jenny Beth Martin's my wingman today. Raheem and Jason have the day off. Jenny Beth is the founder and leader of the Tea Party Patriots, one of the top grassroots organizations in America, and a big backer, early backer of the Trump movement. Also, Jim Schultz, who's from the White House counsel's office under Don McGahn, now in private practice at Cousins up in Philadelphia, and a CNN contributor. You see him all the time, particularly on the toughest shows, Cuomo, Anderson Cooper, Aaron Burnett, Don Lemon, the nightly murderer's row of CNN, that the president sees Schultz all the time because he's hate-watching CNN during that time. I want to go real quickly, Jim, and thank you. I know you're going to the Army-Navy game today, as all you guys up there in Pennsylvania do, and normally I'm up there with my daughter, but I'm not going to be able to make it this year because we're doing the show here. But I want to go real quickly to, and thank you for staying over, this thing of extended trial for exoneration with live witnesses, or just read depositions and have a Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell 3 days and get out of there because you call the vote as soon as you got the votes. Explain to people what the differences are when it goes to the Senate. The two things you're seeing discussed right now between Pat Cipollone and McConnell is either a quick and dirty, where you're going to read some depositions, and as soon as you got the votes, call the vote, and then get out of there. Take the putt, move on to the next tee. Or what President Trump is at least talking about having. He wants the whistleblower. He wants the Bidens, both Hunter and Senator Biden. He wants Schiff. He even wants Nancy Pelosi. So explain the difference in the two to the people, and then which one you would advise.
So there's some benefit politically to be calling in Schiff to the Senate trial to be calling.
You would love to call in Schiff. You're putting a piece up on CNN today that blows Schiff up. I mean, you go through and just this will be up on CNN. We'll put it up on warroom.org. Please go to our website 24/7. It's got news. We're going to have Schultz's thing up linked to CNN. You blow Schiff up today. So Jim Schultz is essentially telling the president, hey, I think you ought to call Schiff. Schiff ought to be a primary witness here.
Because all Schiff is going to do at the end of the day is refuse to come in and testify. And he's going to do the same thing.
How can they hold on, brother. How can they charge the president for obstruction of Congress and then Schiff is going to sit there and refuse to come to a trial in the Senate? How does that work?
The same thing he did. Look, when he said there was no problem with the FISA warrants, that there was no things left out in the FISA warrants, and a memo that he sent out a long time ago. And hey, we turn around, the IG finds that hey, there were big 17 omissions and problems with those FISA warrants. And Schiff always likes running out and the sky is falling or make some assertion that isn't fully baked. And, it's like the boy who cried wolf. Well, this time, if they call him, he's not going to go in and testify. So back to the point as to whether or not I would go down the road of asking all these folks to come in and testify. I think a lot of these folks are going to thumb their nose at Congress on this. So, why open
the Senate, if the Senate holds a trial on the impeachment of the president, they're going to hold a trial. But if they decide to hold a trial where they're actually going to call witnesses, you can't compel people to testify. Is that what you're saying? That if the Senate, if Trump decides he wants to see witnesses, he wants to see his accusers come before on global television.
Come on,
in the trial of the century, that they can't compel the testimony?
They don't. All we have to do is go back and look at the Obama administration. How many people got off with that? The IRS got off. Eric Holder got off. They got to get off. You asked, how can this be that Schiff gets off? Here's how it can be. The Democrats they have a different set of rules for them than there are for conservatives. It's the way it works. We do not live under the rule of law.
And we have to watch this, right? I've been complaining about the fact that they didn't take this thing fully through the courts. At the end of the day, they're going to have the same arguments are going to be made, not as strong arguments, I don't believe, in terms of privilege and other things that they could assert, as it relates to this trial. But I have to tell you, Steve, the next thing that's going to be thought about here, and Cuomo and I went at it on this issue last night, is this whole idea that the White House counsel's office is working with the Senate on it. The next argument that
isn't that collusion? Didn't Mitch McConnell and Pat Civiano, aren't they colluding already to have a rigged? This is according to Cuomo. I saw you last night. CNN's basically positing that this is already rigged. Is it rigged?
Yeah, they're calling it dirty. This impeachment process, and I've been saying all along, is a political process. There's nothing dirty about the majority party and the president working out the process that's going to take place.
But isn't he the jury? Isn't McConnell the jury foreman? Is it normal for the jury?
No, the Senate is not a jury. They're senators. It doesn't. The Constitution doesn't say you are now a juror and leave all your duties as a senator to the side.
Again, this is why the Democrats are trying to have it both ways. They want to finally construct a judicial proceeding in the Senate. Meanwhile, they had this haphazard three different versions of a hearing and a faux investigation before they end up taking this thing over to the Senate. So now when it gets in the Senate, they're okay. We're gonna put some ground rules around this that have some measure of similarity to a court of law. They can't have it both ways. That's not how this works. They're United States senators. They get a say in it, and the Republican majority party is going to get a say in the process, just like the Democrats forced this thing through in the House.
Okay, for our audience, before we let you go, we know you got to get up to the Army-Navy today in Philadelphia, the great location up at the stadium that they've played for many, many decades. How do you think this comes down? Do you think this will be a truncated re-depositions? And according to Lindsey Graham, as soon as you got the votes, take the vote and then move on? Or do you think this takes up the entire month of January? You actually have witnesses, you have the whistleblower, you have Schiff, you actually have testimony from the Bidens, and you actually get a real trial?
Look, I think at the end of the day, the American people have made up their mind on this issue, and so have the senators. It's all been before the American people. It's all been before Congress in terms of what they've been able to.
But for the historical record, President Trump's very conscious of the fact, although the left dismisses this in mainstream media, he's very conscious of the fact of his his historical position, of his position in history, don't you believe he wants a full exoneration, and that exoneration can only come with witnesses?
I think he wants a full exoneration. I don't think it necessarily only comes with witnesses for the reasons I stated earlier. So to the extent, I think the executive branch, while they're communicating with the Senate on this, I think they're going to have to really take the lead of a guy like Lindsey Graham, who's a very good lawyer, but understands the Senate too, and allow him to kind of set the tone and set the process, along with McConnell, of course, as the leader, to set the process on how this is going to take place. So at the end of the day, I don't think there's a need for a fight back and forth. The president can make his arguments and say, look, this is what I want. But if the Senate turns around and say, this is the way we're going to do it because we think this is the best way to get back to the business of serving the people of the United States. Because remember, there's a lot of things that can get done. Just because it's election year doesn't mean they can't work on transportation infrastructure, get something real done on immigration. Right now, none of that's happening because the House has been all tied up with this faux investigation that they've been conducting and then pushing it over to the Senate. Do we really want to have that continue? That's something the president's going to have to take a look at when he's listening to the Senate.
Jim Schultz's piece is going to be up on CNN, we think, later today. We'll have it up as the lead on warroom.org, our website. Jim Schultz, thank you very much. Another brilliant job, and great job last night on Cuomo, and you go into the bear pit. Jim Schultz, former member of the White House counsel's office, a real fighter. He was on Cuomo last night. Always draws the toughest straw. In the shortest straw in CNN. Okay, I want to pivot now to Jenny Beth Martin. Real quickly, for our audience that may be not totally familiar, real quickly, your background. You came and formed the Tea Party Patriots. You're there on that first conference call, I think, on tax day or in April of 2009 when this started to come together. But you had some personal... February 2009. You had gone through, for the first day was going to be tax day. The first rallies were going to be tax day 2009. You had some personal, issues that really made you understand that, hey, in the American system, the bottom can fall out very quickly, and you have to be an engaged citizen. What was your background on this?
Well, my background was that my then husband had a company that failed, a business that failed. The government did not bail us out. We weren't too big to fail.
You didn't get a bailout.
No, we didn't. And we ultimately had to file personal bankruptcy. That's what happens sometimes in America. Things work great. You take a risk, and sometimes it doesn't work out.
That's what happens to entrepreneurs.
And we do have...
And you went and cleaned toilets. You cleaned bathrooms.
Toilets.
You went around basically became a housekeeper, and you were cleaning toilets to put food on the table.
Yeah, we did not, instead of going on a lot of government programs, we cleaned our neighbors' homes, and we repaired computers. And my background used to be programming computers, not politics.
So when I met you with Andrew Breitbart in the spring of 2009.
In March of 2010, right before the Obamacare vote.
Right before the Obamacare vote. And so you were having these huge rallies, and you had been doing this all for the 2009 year. What lessons did you learn from the grassroots about the pressure that can be applied to Congress and to Capitol Hill?
Well, we learned that making phone calls to Capitol Hill, and if the phone line is busy on Capitol Hill, calling the local district office can make a huge difference. Showing up in person at their offices and making sure that you give video and call local media. So even if they don't allow you to come inside, you're still showing up and you are present, and making sure other people know you were there. And also showing up at town halls. And Steve, we've got like 5 town halls coming up between now and Monday that there are people around the country who have the opportunity to show up at.
These are town halls by congressmen and
congressional town halls.
And these are, I take it, are these Democrats in these swing districts?
They are Democrats in swing districts and also other Democrats. So there's one that's happening right now in Maryland at 10 o'clock. But then a little bit later today in New Jersey, there's one with Congressman Malinowski at 1:30 in Branchburg, New Jersey. There's another one tomorrow with Malinowski, I believe, or maybe I'm confused about that. But then there's one with Congressman
Caston. They can go to your website.
They can find it on our website.
Talk about the websites, TrumpDefenseTeam.com.
TrumpDefenseTeam.com.
All one word.
All one word.
And you can get all the town halls, and you're rallying people now to go to these town halls.
You can get all the town halls. You can get the phone numbers of the Dirty 30 so that you can...
For our audience, who's the Dirty 30?
These are the congressmen...
And why do they matter?
They are the congressmen who were elected in 2018. They're Democrat congressmen. congressmen. They're freshmen, and they were elected in districts that President Trump won in 2016. And 12 of these districts, not only did Trump win, Romney won, and McCain won.
Here's the thing, though. The Tea Party had a historic victory in 2010 after the Obamacare vote. And one of the reasons is that we did lose in the Obamacare, but you brought out, at sometimes, hundreds of thousands of people to Washington, D.C. I think one time you had 1 million people show up.
Yeah.
But that momentum led to this massive grassroots victory with virtually no money in 2010. I think it was 62 or 63 seats. Why didn't the Tea Party and the grassroots turn out in the summer and fall of 18 and keep these 31 districts? How did we lose the House when the Tea Party and other grassroots organizations had actually become fantastic? I mean, Trump would not be president if it was not for the grassroots movements coming together and really just riding to the sound of the guns in 16. How did this happen in 18 that essentially led to this impeachment?
Well, the number one motivator, I think, when it comes to these kind of political actions is anger. And it's hard to be angry when you have the presidency, the Congress, both chambers of Congress, and you've got a president who is confirming Supreme Court justices that you like. So
you're saying
the left was angry.
You're saying the left was very smart. The left, essentially, I said this in the spring and summer of 2018, they had taken the playbook of the Tea Party Patriots, and I called the thing that, hey, we're going to lose the House here, and they're going to impeach him, because I could see their anger, their motivation. They were knocking on doors in June and July, voter registration, voter engagement, get out the vote. You could see, and for whatever reason, we couldn't muster that same energy, and I think it was because, hey, President Trump's knocking down things. He's getting a tax cut. He's deregulating. He's passing Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, they just
is that anger back now?
The anger is definitely there right now.
Why is the anger there?
Well, they're angry because they think what's happening to President Trump is wrong. It's not fair, and they see what is happening to President Trump as an assault and an offense personally to them and to their vote.
Why personally?
Because they don't.
Is this a cult of personality, or they respect him as commander-in-chief and as the president? Because it's all mocked and ridiculed. You cut on the mainstream media, and now it's this whole cult of personality, and Jenny Beth Martin is a Trump bot, and all that. Is that how the Tea Party Patriots movement thinks about the president?
No, we don't think of it that way at all. What we see going on, though, is that there's this, exactly what I said a few minutes ago, this continuation where Democrats get to live by one set of rules and laws and get away with breaking laws that they think that Republicans have to live by. It's just
Are you
wrong.
holding President Trump to the same standard you held President Obama to?
I think that we are. Now, I can honestly say I do not think that the Democrats are, because here's how I know that we did with Obama and they are not with Trump. I didn't like President Obama's policies. I in fact hated some of the policies that he had. I fought against them. I stood up. I made my voice heard. I did not like the fact that he was reelected, but you never saw me calling for him to be impeached. What you saw was...
I don't ever remember that in the Tea Party thing at all.
No, because even though we did not like the fact that he was elected, we respected our fellow Americans who voted for him enough to respect the decision they made at the polls. We don't have to like the outcome, but we still respect the system and we respect our fellow Americans. The people who are against President Trump, they have not liked him since the moment he was elected. You and I texted on election night. Those people were planning their next protest.
It was unbelievable. The nullification project started. Jenny Beth and I were talking. It was 2:30 in the morning and there were 10,000 people outside of Trump Tower.
Yeah.
In agony. Okay, I want to go to The Hill. The Hill newspaper, Jimmy Finkelstein's fantastic newspaper that covers everything on Capitol Hill. Lead story this morning is really about the hypocrisy of Jenny Beth Martin and the Tea Party Patriots, and that all these conservative groups, right? All these conservatives, all the limited government guys, all you guys from Cruz, and all the limited government and all this whining the Tea Party did during the Obama administration of government too big and everything like that. You look at the programs that President Trump is putting in, and you're all backing those, where your head would have blown up if Obama had done the same thing. Massive government spending, increases of these programs. So what's your counter to that?
Well, my counter is
unfair. Is that an unfair characterization?
Well, my counter is that you don't see us actually going around saying these are the deals that are being passed are the best deals in the world. Well, we have been.
Why does this always happen in Christmas?
Oh, Christmas is the
didn't
best
Obamacare get done at the last Christmas Eve?
Christmas Eve in the Senate in 2009.
That was a nice stocking stuffer.
Right. They do this and they plan these votes around deadlines like that because they know that members want to go back. They don't want to be. Who wants to be in Washington D.C. on Christmas Eve or on Christmas Day? So they plan these really bad deals and they leave spending until the very last moment.
But here's the point I'm trying to make, because I've been, criticized often of not being with the Republican orthodoxy, particularly about trade and trade deals and tariffs, and I'm a protectionist, is the Tea Party, which started as a limited government, operation, right? It did, That was one of the big things. Obamacare was too intrusive, everything like that.
Constitutionally limited government.
Constitutionally limited government. In the Trump era, where President Trump does have a different set of economic policies that obviously are working, but go against the orthodoxy of some of the Republican traditional things, and even some of the great guys of the House Freedom Caucus. How do you look at the Hill thing, particularly when we have these deficits coming up and some of these other policies that are happening? You guys are the foundational element along the evangelicals, the gun guys, and the Tea Party patriots, grassroots those are the foundational elements of the Trump movement. Okay, how do you guys look at that when you see all these deals being cut and you see the federal budget going up and you're going to see another CR and discretionary spending of $1.3 trillion? How do you and your membership justify that?
Well, I think that what you can see over the last 3.5 years is 3 years when bad deals have happened, we've said that we don't like them. But what I said to you before is very true. Anger motivates our supporters. Our supporters are volunteers. Right now, they're active on
Why
impeachment.
are they angry?
Well, they're angry about impeachment. You know what? Constitutionally, limited government is important. One of the basic foundations of the Constitution is that you accept the outcome of the election. If we can't even get past some basic fundamentals
Do you think
like
this is
that,
an assault on the democracy, an assault on their votes?
I think it is an assault on our constitutional republic.
Let's talk about, we got a couple of minutes here. Going forward, the Tea Party movement, the grassroots elements of the Trump movement. Walk me through, how is that going to participate in 2020? We're hearing today, and I think President Trump tweeted out something about evangelicals last night about people not being registered to vote. There are millions and millions of Americans that are not registered to vote, that are not engaged in this process. How does the Tea Party, where does the grassroots movement go from here? You're putting up a spirited defense of President Trump. You're doing the site to go to is TrumpDefenseTeam.com. Jenny Beth and the leaders of the grassroots movement are doing an amazing job of getting volunteers to call in and go to these town halls and to really not to confront their congressman, but to challenge their congressman on what they're doing. But after that, after the impeachment process, where does the grassroots movement go in its support of President Donald J. Trump?
What we will be doing is working to get out the vote, not so much of people who have not registered. That's not where we are going to focus. We're going to focus on the people who voted for President Trump in 2016, but did not come out and vote in 2012, 2014, 2012, 2010, 2008, 2006.
Does he have to be on the ballot to get the interest of these people? And for instance, I argued he was actually on the ballot in 2018. The left ran it like that. They ran it as a referendum on Trump. But does he have to be on the ballot to get these people enthusiastic enough to go knock on doors and walk precincts?
I think that I don't know if he has to be on the ballot, but what happened in 2018, one of the things that we were dealing with was the failure to restore healthcare freedom in this country. And the fact that did not happen, you have a lot of wonderful tax cuts. Has there been a response to Obamacare from the administration or from Mitch McConnell? Do you think there's been an adequate response yet? Have you seen a healthcare bill or something alternative to Obamacare? Well, I think that Job Creators Network has a great alternative for Obamacare, and my friend over there, Alfredo, is doing a great job. Just fabulous job.
We're going to have a lot more about him because it's going to become okay. We got about 45 seconds left. Walk people through again. How can they get engaged and involved today? TrumpDefenseTeam.com. TrumpDefenseTeam.com. We have the phone numbers of all the Dirty 30. Make phone calls to them, tweet them, tell them not to vote on impeachment. Remind them we will remember in November. That's Jenny Beth Martin, co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, the leader of the Tea Party Patriots today. Jenny Beth, thank you so much for joining us. War Room Impeachment, episode 71. This is Stephen K. Bannon. Tomorrow morning, Jason Miller will be back and joining me live in studio. Remember, we're live 7 days a week throughout the Christmas holidays, also because we're leading up to the trial of the century. That is going to be after the impeachment vote. I believe it's going to come on Wednesday to impeach the President of the United States. We're then going to go to a trial. We're going to cover every aspect of it. Go to our website, warroom.org, 24 hours a day. You can also see us on TrumpDefenseTeam.com because we're on the homepage there. Jenny Beth Martin's joined us. Thank you so much, Jenny Beth. We'll see you tomorrow live from Capitol Hill with Jason Miller, Stephen K. Bannon at War Room Impeachment.